What began as just needing an amplifier for his band, back in 1966, a British bassist called Laney certainly sowed the seeds for what was to grow into one of the largest, most well-known amplification brands on the planet. Over 50 years later, and honouring its roots both in name and styling, the Laney Digbeth range promises everything that you'd expect from a leading worldwide brand. Hi, I'm Dan Veale, and in Bass Gear magazine we are looking at an entire Laney Digbeth bass rig. We have the 500 watt Digbeth head here, and underneath, for the first part of the review, we are looking at the DBV410 speaker cabinet, and later on we are going to compare that to the DBV212 speaker cabinet. There's no doubt that we have a good looking bass rig here. I love this vintage styling, and furthermore I really approve of an uncluttered feature set, and you can see all the controls nice and clearly labelled on stage. On the left hand side here, as expected, is my instrument input, and next to that we have two level controls. The first is a FET clean channel, and the second is a level control for the tube drive section. Now we can actually run these separately and have a clean sound or a driven sound. Furthermore, I can switch between the clean FET channel and the tube drive section with this toggle switch, or I can blend the two together by pulling out the tube drive volume control. If I'm away from my amplifier on stage, then the good news is I can also control this function with a foot switch. Now, if you've seen my reviews in the past, you'll know that I love my tech. You know that I love my details. But there is something to be said for a really clean and clever layout that will allow you to get some great tones without faffing around with loads and loads of knobs and switches. And the Laney Digbeth here, I have to say, absolutely nails it. The equalizer on the Laney Digbeth amplifier heads is active, and we are treated to active bass boost and bass cut from a center click position, interestingly marked as number 5 on the dial. We also have active mid-range with boost and cut from a center click, also marked as number 5 on the dial. And then on the right hand side, we also have an active treble control with the center click, and what a surprise, we also have number 5 on the dial. Now I really like what's in store for the mid-range control on the Digbeth bass heads. Rather than giving us a semi-parametric equalizer where we have to sort of, guess or learn which is going to be the correct frequency for us to boost and cut, Laney have essentially given us 4 presets, and they're all absolutely brilliant. In position 1, we have a narrow filter that will allow us a certain amount of surgical sculpting on our low-mid frequencies. In position 2, it is a much wider filter. And this is going to be fantastic because as I cut away the mid-range frequencies, I get that big cab sound. But also, if I want to add some more of that more warmth and woodiness to my bass sound, then boosting this control will do that. In position 3, we have moved that center frequency up towards the upper middle frequencies, and this is going to be great for adding a bit of finger style definition to our tone. And finally, position 4 here If I'm playing with a pick or slap bass technique and I want to add a bit more of a percussive edge to my sound, then I can certainly boost these frequencies. But at the same token, if I want to go a little bit more vintage, then I can wind that control back and I'll start to soften up my top end frequencies a little more. Speaking of super useful amplifier features, and certainly inspired by vintage hi-fi of yesteryear, Laney have also included the tilt control, which I seem to remember was also on the SL and SLS heads from a few years ago. A really super useful feature which tilts the whole of the EQ spectrum around a center pivot point. As I turn the control towards the left, I get more bass end and less treble end, and then round to the right I get more treble end and less bass end. This is a super simple way of dialing in a good balance of my equalization on stage or in a recording environment. Finally, a little bit like our favorite tube amplifiers, there is a standby switch. And what this does is it mutes the output to the speakers and the DI output at the same time. And we even get an indication that the amplifier is in standby mode. Before we flip Digbeth around and have a look at the rear panel feature set, let's get some tones out of this bad boy. I'm going to play along with a simple set of drum tracks, and I'm going to put some information on the screen as to exactly what's dialed in. Time to double the size of that speaker cabinet and dial in that deep, pillowy bass end with some nice crystal clear top end. For this sound example, I have dialed back the treble and pushed the mids up for that typical P bass sound. This bass has got rounds on, so by dialing back, I wanted a softer sound which sounds maybe a little bit more like flat rounds. I've brightened up the whole sound now by pushing up the treble controls. I've moved the mids up to the upper mids as well, and I've pushed the low end for a really bright and scooped bass sound. I've switched the Digbeth head over into the tube drive channel, and this is a tube drive on its own without the blended FET channel as well. And I'm favouring that more indie rock bass sound. Let's check it out. Let's dial that drive up a little bit to make it a bit more raspy and aggressive in the top end. Now with a full band drive like that, Understandably, on bass, the low end can come a little bit less stable and certainly have less punch than it would do with a clean sound. And that is where the beauty of the blend control comes in on the Digbeth head. Simply by pulling out the tube volume head, you can see that the indicator changed color as well. We now have a blend of the clean channel and the drive channel together. Let's have a listen to what that does to that gritty bass sound. I'm looking for a more punchy low end. Personally, with the grit on there, I'm going to pull the drive back just a little bit and pull the top end back and hopefully get a more rounded but also very exciting and energetic bass sound. I'm hoping it's come across clearly in the video, but in the studio here, it sounds like I have nailed that quintessential British valve amp bass sound. It's full of life and energy, and it's just on the edge of drive, and it sounds really, really fat and full. There's way more functionality than you might expect around the back of Digbeth. It really has everything you'll need for a performance, recording, or home practice scenario. On the left hand side, we have a standard IEC input for your mains power. Next to that, on-off switch. This is your master on-off switch. Don't forget we've got that mute switch around the front as well. Next to that, a DI output. Now the balance line DI we have been feeding into my recording device today. And you have the option of going post EQ to pick up all of that lovely drive and EQ sounds, or pre, where I'm just having essentially the sound of my clean bass guitar come out. And I could use this for reamping purposes or whatever my performance needs are. There is a ground lift switch here as well, should you encounter any strange buzzes or anything like that. And sometimes lifting the ground can help from a DI perspective. Obviously, read the manual to find out more details about that if that is an unfamiliar term. We have a headphone output with a volume control. How fantastic is this? You can plug your earphones in and you can practice away to your heart's content and not annoy the neighbours. For playing along with your laptop or backing tracks or whatever it might be, we have an auxiliary input and a level control for that as well. So you can blend between the level of your backing tracks and your clean bass sound going into your lugholes. To the right hand side of that, Digbeth has an effects loop. This is absolutely fantastic because it allows you to decide if you want to put your effects pedals before the input of the amplifier or after the preamplifier section. For matching with pedals or, for example, professional rack units, we can change the effects loop level into different positions. And in the third position, we can actually bypass the loop altogether. Very, very handy if I'm leaving cables connected all the time and I just want to bypass so I can hear my bass sound without an external loop. We can daisy chain an external tuner, and when the amplifier is in mute mode, this output will obviously stay live so you can tune silently. And speaking of mute mode, like the drive section on Digbeth, we can also use an external foot switch to put the amplifier in mute as well. Very, very handy if we are on the other side of the stage and we need to silence our output. And on the subject of output, the 500 watt RMS power amplifier on Digbeth is gonna take no prisoners, and I'm very, very pleased to see a heavy duty locking speak-on output socket included as well. All of these features have been crammed into an all metal chassis, and that is housed inside this very, very tasteful vinyl covered multi-ply wooden cabinet, which looks every bit stylish and vintage and classic and very, very cool. All of these rugged features aren't just here to look pretty though. This amplifier is designed for the road, and on the road it will go. It also features a universal power supply. So between the voltages of 100 and 240 volts main supply, you can rock up anywhere in the world and just plug this amplifier right on in without having to flick any switches or make any adjustments with screwdrivers. Another feature that I think is absolutely genius is the amplifier actually features a noise gate in its preamplifier section. So when you're using drive sounds, the noise floor can be lifted, and sometimes you'll hear a bit of hiss and a little bit of extra noise going on in between your playing notes. The noise gate senses this and will actually just silence the amplifier briefly until your next note comes along, and then it'll open up again. This is a fantastic feature that I certainly haven't seen on an amplifier for quite a long while. So throughout the review, you will have heard a wide range of tones coming from the Digbeth rig. It's not FR, it's not flat response, it's not supposed to be absolutely hi-fi. It is rich with colour and tone and really does take drive and aggressive playing in its stride. But also on its cleaner sounds, I think that colour really brings a richness, certainly, to this vintage passive bass. For the majority of this review, you have been listening to the Digbeth 4x10 speaker cabinet. This 4 ohm speaker cabinet is ported and features vertically aligned speakers rather than the more usual square horizontal arrangement. Underneath this tasteful speaker grille, the 4 10-inch speaker drivers are made by another great British brand, HH, and they are from the Black series. Furthermore, for some top-end sparkle, we also have a compression driver made by Levocha, and that adds a really nice sparkle to our top end. The whole cabinet is made from a multi-layer ply, and boy is it reassuringly chunky. And for that reason, there's some heavy-duty handles on the side of the cabinet, but also a pull handle on the back. Why, you might ask? Well, the cabinet also comes with a set of caster wheels built into the actual cabinet itself, and also a kick panel so you can push the cabinet into a position that makes it easier for pulling towards the venue stage. And there's also skid panels on the back as well, so when you lay this cabinet down, you can push it into the back of your van and it won't ruin the vinyl finish. For connectivity around the back of the cabinet, we have a combination speak-on and jack socket. This means that although I would recommend you use a speak-on locking connector, you can also use 1/4 inch speaker cables. Now, the reason why I recommend the speak-ons is because I have known people to use instrument cables for their amplifier to speaker connection, and this isn't recommended, especially on higher power devices. In terms of that top end sparkle, the tweeter has 2 levels and also a bypass switch on the back as well, and you can dial that in to taste. If you'd rather have a softer sound which features no tweeter whatsoever, it's a really nice addition to the overall presentation of the Digbeth rig. The ceramic drivers on board and the nice multi-ply chunky cabinet delivers both in vintage looks and vintage tone, and I promise you will not be disappointed when you crank this monster up. It does sound really pokey. Aside from the good looks and good tones, I also prefer the vertical arrangement of the speakers inside this cabinet. It makes the cabinet a little bit taller, which means the sound is closer to your ears when you're stood on stage, and that means you've got a better chance of hearing your top end with more clarity. But also, getting through door frames with grazed knuckles is going to be a thing of the past, as there's going to be room for your hands and the cabinet at the same time. But of course, don't forget we've got the wheels on the back as well, and we can push or pull the cabinet through doorways with relative ease. Much like the Digbeth 4x10, the 2x12 here also features HH drivers, and this cabinet will give you 500 watts RMS of headroom to play with, and the cabinet, like the 4x10, is 4 ohms. Now, don't be fooled for thinking that this cabinet is actually taller. To fit it on camera, I've actually put it on a little stand. It isn't as tall as the 4x10. Not only does it have HH drivers on board, it also has the same Lavocha tweeter and the same control panel on the back to set the levels, as well as the Speak-On combo connector. It is ported, and you don't get wheels this time, but you do still have the same heavy-duty handles on the side. Like the previous sound sample, in this setting I've added loads of upper mid-range to really make the fingerstyle pop through this 2x12 speaker cabinet. And since we have two meaty 12-inch woofers, let's scoop up mid-range, boost the low end, and play some reggae thumb style. Neither the 4x10 or the 2x12 are considered flat response, and that's not what they do. They deliver up the really rich, vintage, colourful sounds even when the dials are set completely flat at noon. I really like the out-of-the-box sound from both of these cabinets. I can't quite decide which one I like better. Possibly the 12s, a slightly smoother sound, although I think the 4x10 probably has it on top end and upper mid-range detail. It's for you to try out and for you to decide which you like best, and maybe you could let me know in the comments when you tried out the two cabinets which you like the most. I think I have managed to leave no stone unturned with this review. But don't forget, there is a written section to go with this review over in Bass Gear magazine, so head on over to bassgearmag.com to go check that out, along with our other reviews from some of the finest gear that you'll find in the bass world on the planet. But for now, thank you ever so much for checking out this review. I've been Dan Veale, and you have been watching Bass Gear magazine.